when that storm hit, I was just flattening the base, so I'm just going to continue that process of sort of just worrying that stone off with the punch, just knocking off all the high spots. I don't care about blowing out some chunks on the bottom like that. That's going to happen when you're punching from out in to out direction, because that's going to mostly get cut off anyway. That's where the bad stone is. I'm running this at high speed, but it's not incredibly time-consuming process. The punch makes pretty short work of a massive stone like this. But here's a real-time snip of what I'm doing. There's a weird sort of optical illusion here. That demarcation that's running diagonally, it's about an inch high on the bottom. But for some reason the illusion is you can't tell which direction it is. So I'm actually going to keep lowering that plateau that's sort of on the bottom right, your bottom right. For me right now it's on the left. But so I'm just running the punch sort of facing out, and then any high spots that are left behind I'm going to reduce with this bush hammer. Just knock it off. This doesn't have to be incredibly smooth. It's just going to be, it just needs to be flat because it's the base. I just love looking at, at using the punch at high speed. It just seems like you're just magically removing the stone. It's a little slower than this, obviously, but it does go reasonably quickly. You know, the surface left behind by this punching kind of varies, like the hills and valleys, you know, like half an inch different. So I have sort of an option here. I can just bush off the chunks sticking up, or I can take a claw chisel and sort of flatten it a little more. I think I'm going to do that because it gives me a chance to use the pneumatic chisel. This is what that looks like. It's just a little handle. It's got a lot of power. I added on a switch here to turn the air power on and off. You just slide a bit in here, and it just hammers on the end like that. You'll see in a minute. Which the only thing you have to remember is every once in a while, just put a drop or two of oil down there, literally a drop or two. And there you go. Now I've got this turned up pretty high, so let's give it a shot. The claw chisel is really just like 5 little point chisels in one, you know, sort of arranged in a row. So you really end up with the same sort of furrows and peaks, except they're all miniature. So by the time you get done with this, the difference between the low spots and the high spots is like an 1/8 of an inch or less. Yeah, probably 1/16 of an inch down and maybe an 1/8 of an inch up. So that's this is one of the tools that pneumatics is just awesome for, you know, because you're not hitting the chisel that hard, and you just but it's tapping it, you know, probably 2,000 or 3,000 times a minute, whereas you're doing it by hand, you're tapping it, you know, maybe 120 times a minute. So they're just awesome for this. They're also really good for bush hammers. I have bush hammers, but for some reason with this it's easier to just use the bush hammer on a literal hammer, because it's I'm not going to be bush hammering much, just knocking off high spots. So if you remember, I chiseled a pretty square line around this. So just by eye, I've gotten it pretty flat with the first with the punch, and then with the claw chisel. But now what I'm doing is I've taken a board and covered it with colored chalk. and I just put the flat board on there and rub it, and it'll only make marks on the high spots. So then I just take the bush hammer and knock off any blue chalk that I see, and do it again, and the high spots are now all in a slightly different place, and then I do it again, and by the time you're done, you're getting, you know, and you have the high spots sprinkled evenly all over the whole surface. You know you've got it quite flat, and for my purposes, flat enough, because this is just a base. But that's pretty much how you flatten the bottom of something. It's a very logical process. That's it. We're all done. We have a flat bottom and ready to stand it up. Should take 5 minutes, right? So I'm wrapping it in chains. Now these chains are all held together with bolts, 3/8" bolts, which is the same size as the opening in the chain. But it's important that the bolts are never really bearing any weight. They're not strong like the chain is. So, you know, basically I've knotted the chain, and I'm only using the bolts really to tack the ends of the knots together. If you really need to have chain attached in such a way that the attachment bears weight, you need to use shackles that are, you know, metal parts that are properly engineered to you know, go through the hole and have a you know, a lift point, and you know, a bolt is really just tacking it together. So don't rely on them for strength. You really, it's just a way to hold the ends of your knot from falling apart. The chains are pretty much on. Got my lift point there on the end. More about that later. And so all I got to do is set up the engine hoist. And this just takes a minute. This is real time, not speeded up. So there's just a pin down here, and the pin locks the leg in place when it's open, and at a different hole it locks the leg from falling over when it's folded up. But the holes never quite seem to align right, so you end up having to wrestle with shaking it around until the big, it's like a 3/4 inch pin, until it'll, you know, go through both holes. There's actually a tool for that called a spud wrench, but you can just jerk it around with a crowbar. And so here now I'm just aligning it and getting ready to lift from that attachment point on the end that you can see there. I've got my hand on the hook. Hold everything. Look what I'm about to do. If I pick it up from the end, as it lifts up, it's going to have all the weights sitting on that far corner, pushing down and hard sideways towards the hook. So God knows what would happen. It would flip over the table, it would swing in the breeze. I don't know what would happen, but it wouldn't be pretty. So I got to stop, cable it so that I can pick it up from the center and set it on the floor. Then I can pick it up from the end, and it's harmless. It'll just stand up and maybe swing a little bit as it comes off the ground, but that's fine. So stop. Don't try to pick something up off a table crooked like this, or you'll have a very exciting few minutes. Okay, that's better. You see what I'm doing now? Now I've picked it up vertically, and it's nothing. It's barely swinging at all. Everything's just fine. So it's good that if you don't have to readjust for the table, as anyway, it wasn't optimally arranged for the space. So we're all ready to go, but the hoist won't actually lift the stone high enough to put it on the bench. Oh man, I completely didn't think of that as a problem. So it's a problem, not a disaster. So what I've done here is I just happen to have a bunch of 12 by 12 timbers left from shoring up you know, sewage pipe installation, and they're very heavy and solid. So what I've done is nailed cleats on top of them so that I can set the engine hoist up a foot higher. And there's, if you look closely, you'll see that there's wood nailed all around the wheels so that they can't roll or move in any way. So it's perfectly safe. It looks a little precarious, but it's not. It's rigidly fastened to these very heavy blocks. And now I can lift it up plenty high. So that was a kind of a shocked for a second to realize I couldn't actually get it up on the bench. But seriously, if you have to do this and have a hoist or some piece of equipment like that setting up on a higher platform, do not skimp on fastening it down so that it cannot move. Because so I'm just gonna set it down on the table. You know, I'm being careful not to get under it and to make sure I got room to jump back in the unlikely event that anything happens. But it's actually up there quite securely. And notice that my hands, when I hold these pieces of wood, I don't ever have my fingers wrapped around under them, just out of force of habit. There's no way for this to set down now. But if it did set down and you have your fingers wrapped around that wood, it's going to pin your fingers to the table, even though your fingers are never under the block. I've seen that happen, and it's a really big surprise to the person it happens to, although it's obvious what would happen. But it's somehow most people's minds aren't tuned to that danger unless they've seen someone get squished before. So the weight is on the wood now. So I have to actually pound these some extra supports under there because there is actually weight sitting on it. I think all the weight is on it at this point. Here's how I secured the wheels so they couldn't roll off these blocks. If there was any danger of it shifting and a tendency for it to move the hoist, I would actually put metal strapping over it and screw it to the block so that it couldn't possibly ride up. But this is a vertical shape. It's not going to tend to jerk anything sideways when it comes off when the weight comes on or off the surface. This looks like an amazing amount of chain to use for a simple thing, but the only two of these stretches of chain are doing anything. The vertical one that you can't see, it's on the right side, you'll see it in a second, is holding all of the weight, and then that one that goes around it like a belt is doing something. That's bolted to the vertical chain so that the stone can't turn around and kind of tumble out the side. So it's not holding much weight, it's just keeping the stone in the sling. The rest is just because the chain is like 30 feet long, and I just had to wind it on there and bolt it in place just to get it out of the way. You can't just snip chain like it's twined. So yeah, but there's only, see that bolt is holding the belt chain around it so that the stone can't just sort of fall out the side. It probably wouldn't anyway, but you can't depend on that. So that's what's going on there. So all the weight's on the bench. I've just had the chains left on there just in case I need to shift it. But now it's time to take them off. We're all done. It feels really solid. It feels like a tree trunk sitting there. There's no wiggle or movement in the stand at all, and it's solid. It's solid where it's sitting. I'm a little bit behind on the videos. The model is actually done now. I just haven't put out the videos yet. So the last big job before actually starting to carve is to strip away a bunch of bad stone that's on this block where weathering damaged it. But that's already covered in the video, so we're almost ready to rock and roll. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.